They had the intelligence. They saw the troop movements. They read the prisoner interrogations. Every Allied commander knew the Germans were planning something, but only one general was ready when 250,000 enemy soldiers attacked. Why? Because he trusted reality over consensus, and the system never forgave him for it. This is the story they don't want you to know. There's a recording you were never supposed to hear. December 9th, 1944. A classified briefing room in Nancy, France. One man stands before a map covered in red pins, telling his commander that everyone else is wrong, that the enemy isn't defeated, that the largest German offensive in Western Europe is coming in exactly 7 days. His name was Oscar Koch, and his warning should have changed everything. But here's what they do on Teach You in History class. The intelligence was available to everyone. The tank movements, the radio silence, the massive troop buildups in the Ardennes forest. Every Allied commander had access to the same reports Koch was reading. Every single one. And yet, when Hitler unleashed 250,000 men in the largest battle the U.S. Army would ever fight, only one general was ready. Only one had contingency plans, written, coded, and waiting for activation. The question isn't why Patton knew. The question is why everyone else chose not to. And when you understand the answer, you'll never look at institutional authority the same way again. Picture the Allied command in autumn 1944. Paris liberated. Germans retreating. Victory so close you could taste it. Supreme Commander Eisenhower's staff was already planning victory parades. Field Marshal Montgomery told his troops on December 15th that the enemy was incapable of major offensive operations. General Broadley, commanding the 12th Army Group, actually said out loud that he'd de-welcome a German counterattack because it would let them kill more Germans with less effort. These weren't stupid men. They had the finest intelligence apparatus ever assembled. They had ultra-intercepts breaking German codes. They had air reconnaissance, photographing every square mile of enemy territory. They had prisoner interrogations, radio traffic analysis, and networks of resistance fighters feeding them information. The intelligence existed. It was documented. It was filed. It was available. But there's something you need to understand about institutional thinking. When an organization decides what reality is, contradictory evidence doesn't change minds. It gets explained away. Dismissed, buried under the weight of consensus. And in winter 1944, the consensus at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force was that Germany was finished. Oscar Koch wasn't supposed to be right. He was a colonel, not a general. He was Patton's G2, his intelligence chief. And that meant he existed outside the inner circle. Koch had been tracking something terrifying. 15 known panzer divisions in Western Germany, but only 5 were in contact with Allied forces. The others, unknown, disappeared, vanished into the fog of warlike ghosts. He documented unprecedented rail activity in November. Hundreds of trains moving west every single day. He found reports of captured Allied uniforms being sent to a special training facility. English-speaking German volunteers, learning American dialect, and practicing sabotage techniques. Night after night, Koch's photo reconnaissance planes flew over the German rear. The images showed tank formations moving toward the Ardennes, bridging equipment being hauled to river crossings. Fresh infantry divisions arriving in what was supposed to be a quiet sector. Koch compiled it all. Every scrap of data, every disturbing pattern. And on December 9th, he walked into Patton's office and told him the unthinkable. Germany was preparing a massive counteroffensive, and it was aimed directly at the weakest point in the Allied line. The Ardennes, the ghost front, where inexperienced American divisions were resting. Here's what happened next, and pay attention, because this is where the conspiracy of silence begins. Patton believed Koch, not because he was gullible, but because Patton understood something about institutional bureaucracy that most generals didn't. He trusted his intelligence officer more than he trusted the consensus. Koch had earned that trust in Sicily, in Normandy, in the drive across France. When Koch said something was coming, Patton listened. So on December 9th, a full week before Hitler's offensive, Patton ordered his staff to develop contingency plans Tray of Tim, each with a code name Nickel. Dieman sent 3 different axes of attack northward into the Ardennes, depending on where the German breakthrough occurred. He didn't wait for permission from Supreme Headquarters. He didn't ask Bradley or Eisenhower if it was okay to plan for a scenario they insisted was impossible. He simply prepared. Quietly. Efficiently. In the shadows of institutional denial. And here is the thing that should make your blood run cold. The same intelligence Koch was analyzing existed at every level of command. Bradley had it. Eisenhower had it. Montgomery had it. They all received the same reports about German troop movements and radio silence and mysterious buildups, but they didn't act. Why? That's the question that echoes through history. Why did the institutional machinery fail when one man succeeded? The answer lies in understanding how organizations protect themselves from uncomfortable truths. Intelligence analysis isn't just about collecting data. It's about interpreting data through the lens of institutional expectations. And in December 1944, Supreme Headquarters had decided that Germany was beaten. That narrative had been established. Resources were being allocated based on that narrative. Strategic planning assumed that narrative, career advancement, depended on supporting that narrative. When intelligence officers at Bradley's headquarters saw the same evidence Koch saw, they hesitated. They qualified their language. They noted German capability for an attack, but stopped short of predicting it would actually happen. Why? Because predictions that contradict institutional consensus are career-ending. They make you look like a fearmonger. A defeatist, someone who doesn't understand the big picture. Brigadier General Edwin Seaberth, Bradley's intelligence chief, later admitted he'd had doubts, but was afraid to voice forceful warnings. Afraid. Not of the Germans, afraid of his own command structure. That's the dark heart of institutional failure. The system doesn't suppress truth through conspiracy. It suppresses truth through conformity, through careerism, through the unspoken understanding that contradicting your superiors is professional suicide. December 16th arrived like the apocalypse. 5:30 in the morning. The Ghost Front erupted in fire. 250,000 German troops. 600 tanks. 2,000 artillery pieces. The largest German offensive of the Western War, smashing into 80 miles of lightly held American positions. The Germans achieved total surprise. Total. Units were overrun in their sleep. Command posts captured. Communication lines severed. 2 entire regiments of the 106th Infantry Division surrounded within hours. Thousands of American soldiers killed or captured in the first day. And across the Allied command structure. From Bradley's headquarters in Luxembourg to Eisenhower's in Versailles, the reaction was shock, disbelief. How could this happen? How could 250,000 enemy troops assemble without warning? But here's the truth they couldn't face. There had been warnings, dozens of them. A captured document on December 4th revealed that a big attack was being readied. Prisoners confirmed it was scheduled the week before Christmas. Photo reconnaissance showed gun emplacements and troop concentrations. The 9th Air Force sent a teletype on December 11th warning that the Luftwaffe had built up enough strength for major operations. Every piece of the puzzle was there, but institutional inertia is a kind of blindness. When an organization decides what's real, contradictory evidence becomes invisible, not hidden. Invisible. 19 hours after the German offensive began, Patton sat in a freezing room in Verdun, France. Eisenhower had summoned his commanders for an emergency conference. The mood was grim. Maps showed German spearheads driving deep into American lines. Bradley looked stern, worried about his First Army being cut off. British officers were calculating how many days before German panzers reached the Meuse River. Eisenhower stood before them and said something remarkable. He said the present situation should be regarded as one of opportunity, not disaster. There would be only cheerful faces at this conference table. It was a command performance of optimism. But then came the question that exposed everything. Eisenhower turned to Patton and asked when Third Army could attack north into the German flank. This was the moment. The room full of generals, British and American staff officers, everyone waiting to see how quickly Patton could disengage from his current operations. turn his army 90 degrees, and mount a counteroffensive. In military terms, pivoting an entire army is like turning an aircraft carrier. It takes time planning, coordination, logistics. Every general in that room knew it would take weeks. Patton looked at Eisenhower and said, "On December 22nd, with 3 divisions. 3 days away." The room erupted. Some thought he was boasting. British officers openly laughed. It was impossible. Absurd. Patton wasn't finished. He told them he could launch the attack in 48 hours with a smaller force, or wait 6 days for a more concentrated assault with 6 divisions. But 3 days. 3 divisions. Strong attack. He'd already decided. Here's what no one in that room understood except Patton. He'd been ready for 7 days. Since December 9th, since Koch's briefing, the contingency plans existed. The code names were written. The staff work was done. All Patton needed was Eisenhower's approval to execute. When the meeting broke, Patton walked over to his operations officer, Colonel Harkins, and said, "Telephone Gay. Give him the code name. Tell him to get started." The code name was Nickel, the northward attack through Ardennes to Bastogne, and with that single word, transmitted by phone from Verdun to Nancy, the machinery engaged. Staff officers pulled pre-written orders from files. Division commanders received movement instructions they'd been briefed on days earlier. Tank units and infantry regiments began turning north. Not in chaos, not in improvisation, in execution of a plan that had been waiting for activation. This is what institutional readiness looks like. Not the consensus reality of Supreme Headquarters, where everyone agreed Germany was beaten, but the prepared reality of one commander who'd trusted his intelligence officer over the comfortable narrative. Patton never returned to his headquarters in Nancy. He drove straight to Luxembourg, closer to the fight, and spent the next 3 days physically moving his army, directing traffic at crossroads, ordering units forward through snow and ice, making sure the impossible thing he'd promised actually happened. And it did. On December 22nd, 72 hours after the Verdun meeting, 3 full divisions of Patton's Third Army attacked north into the German flank. But let's go back to the question that matters. Why was Patton ready when no one else was? The easy answer is that he was a better general. More aggressive, more confident. That's what the hagiographies say. But that's not the whole truth. The whole truth is darker and more disturbing. Patton was ready because he operated outside the institutional consensus. He didn't care what Supreme Headquarters believed. He didn't care about career advancement or political correctness, or whether his actions fit the approved narrative. He cared about one thing: killing Germans and winning battles. That singular focus made him dangerous to the system. It made him uncontrollable, and after the war, it may have made him a target. Because here's what happened in the months after the Bulge. Patton's Third Army drove deep into Germany. They liberated concentration camps. They captured vast territories. And Patton started saying things publicly that made his superiors nervous. He said the real enemy wasn't defeated Germany, but Soviet Russia. He said the Western allies should keep German units armed and ready to fight Stalin. He gave interviews criticizing Eisenhower's strategy. He refused to follow denazification policies he thought were stupid. He became, in the eyes of the institutional machinery, a problem. A brilliant problem. An indispensable problem. But a problem nonetheless. December 21st, 1 year after the Bulge, Patton was still in Germany, commanding the occupation. He was out pheasant hunting with his chief of staff when their car, a Cadillac, was hit by an army truck at low speed. The truck was driven by a technical sergeant named Robert Thompson. The collision wasn't severe. The vehicles were both damaged but drivable. No one else in either vehicle was seriously injured. But Patton, sitting in the back seat, suffered a broken neck. He was paralyzed from the neck down. Transported to a hospital in Heidelberg, he lingered for 12 days before dying on December 20th. The official cause was pulmonary embolism and congestive heart failure. Complications from the injury. But here's where it gets strange. The accident scene was never properly investigated. No photographs were taken. The truck driver, Thompson, was never extensively interrogated. He disappeared from Germany shortly after. The exact circumstances of the collision were never fully documented, and in the decades since, questions have multiplied. Why did a two-vehicle low-speed accident kill only Patton? Why were standard investigative procedures not followed? Why did the institutional machinery seem so incurious about the death of America's most famous general? Conspiracy theories have flourished. Some say House operatives assassinated him on orders from Washington. Others blame Soviet agents. Still others claim it was simply a tragic accident, nothing more. But whether Patton's death was assassination or accident misses the deeper point. The institutional machinery that failed to heed warnings before the bulge, that laughed at Patton in the Verdun conference, that consistently underestimated threats and overestimated control, that same machinery survived the war intact. The generals who'd been wrong about German capabilities got promoted. The intelligence officers who'd buried uncomfortable data kept their careers. The system that created the conditions for a surprise attack learned nothing, changed nothing, protected itself perfectly. This is how institutions work. They don't fail upward by accident. They fail upward by design, because institutions aren't optimized for truth. They're optimized for survival, and survival means protecting the consensus, punishing dissenters, and ensuring that the official narrative remains unchallenged regardless of evidence. Patton threatened that narrative, not because he was smarter than everyone else, but because he didn't care about the narrative. He cared about reality. And in December 1944, reality was a massive German offensive that everyone except Patton pretended couldn't happen. Until it did. Oscar Koch, the intelligence officer who predicted it, wrote later that the failure wasn't an intelligence collection. It was an evaluation, an application. The information existed. The analysis was available. But institutions don't change their minds easily. They'd rather be surprised. Let's talk about what happened to the men who were right. Koch, the intelligence officer who predicted the bulge, never achieved high rank. He retired as a brigadier general in 1953, respected but not celebrated, not invited into the inner circles where institutional memory is written. His book, Jet to Intelligence for Patton, published posthumously, is barely known outside military intelligence circles. He died in 1970. No presidential, no national mourning, just a quiet death and a place in the Military Intelligence Hall of Fame, where few civilians ever visit. Patton, of course, died in 45, 12 days after his mysterious accident. But even before his death, the institutional machinery was distancing itself from him. Eisenhower removed him from command of Third Army, gave him a paper-pushing job overseeing military records. The man who'd saved the Allied offensive at the bulge was sidelined, embarrassed, made irrelevant. Why? Because he'd become inconvenient. His opinions about Russia contradicted Allied policy. His criticism of denazification contradicted occupation strategy. His very existence was a reminder that institutional consensus could be catastrophically wrong. So the institution did what institutions do. It marginalized the threat. Quietly, professionally, with plausible deniability. No conspiracy needed, just the smooth machinery of bureaucratic self-preservation. Here's what you need to understand about the Battle of the Bulge and its aftermath. It wasn't an intelligence failure in the technical sense. Ultra was still breaking German codes. Reconnaissance planes were still flying. Agents were still reporting. The data collection apparatus worked fine. What failed was interpretation, analysis, the willingness to believe uncomfortable truths. And that failure wasn't accidental. It was structural, built into the way large organizations process information. When you're part of an institution, you're rewarded for supporting institutional conclusions. You're punished, subtly or overtly, for contradicting them. The result is a kind of collective blindness where everyone sees the same data and reaches the same wrong conclusion because reaching any other conclusion is professionally dangerous. Patton escaped this trap not because he was a genius, but because he de-built a parallel command structure. He trusted Koch over supreme headquarters. He prepared contingencies, regardless of official doctrine. He acted on his own assessment of reality, rather than waiting for institutional permission. That independence saved thousands of lives in December 4, but it also made him unmanageable, unpredictable, A maverick who couldn't be controlled, and the institutional machinery never forgives that. It can't. Because if one person can be right when the institution is wrong, it calls into question the entire legitimacy of institutional authority. So, what's the lesson? What's the dark truth buried in this story? It's this. The same structures that give organizations power also make them blind. Hierarchy, consensus building, career incentives, information gatekeeping, these create stability and coordination, but they also create conformity and groupthink. When everyone in a system benefits from believing the same thing, contradictory evidence doesn't change minds. It gets filtered out, explained away, buried in footnotes. The warnings before the bulge weren't ignored because commanders were stupid. They were ignored because accepting those warnings would have meant admitting the institution had been wrong, that the strategy was flawed, that the assumptions were mistaken, that months of planning and resource allocation were based on false premises. Organizations can't admit that easily. It's too threatening to the authority structure. So they don't. They keep believing their own narrative until reality forces itself upon them in blood and fire. And then, even after the catastrophe, the institutional machinery rewrites history. The Battle of the Bulge becomes a story of American resilience and ultimate victory. The intelligence failure gets downplayed. The warnings that were ignored get forgotten. And the system that created the disaster survives, intact and unaccountable, ready to repeat the same mistakes. December 16th, 1944. 5:30 in the morning. German artillery opens fire along the Ghost Front. Thousands of American soldiers die in the first hours because their commanders refuse to believe intelligence they'd been given weeks earlier. But one general was ready. One general had contingency plans written, coded, and waiting. One general trusted his intelligence officer over institutional consensus. And when the crisis came, that general saved the Allied offensive. Patton wasn't a prophet. He wasn't blessed with supernatural foresight. He was simply willing to listen when everyone else chose deafness, to prepare when everyone else chose complacency, to act on reality rather than consensus. That's not a story about one man's genius. It's a story about institutional failure, about how organizations protect themselves at the expense of truth, about how careerism and conformity create blindness, about how the same structures that coordinate armies and allocate resources also suppress dissent and punish independence. Oscar Koch predicted the bulge. The intelligence existed. The warnings were given. But only Patton listened. And now, 80 years later, the lesson remains unlearned. Because institutions haven't changed. They still reward conformity and punish truth. They still choose comfortable narratives over uncomfortable evidence. They still fail, predictably, catastrophically, and without accountability. Unless someone like Patton comes along, someone willing to trust reality over consensus, someone ready when everyone else is blind. The question isn't whether that will happen again. The question is whether, when it does, anyone will be ready, or whether, like December 1944, we'll be caught sleeping while the world burns.